There we go. We are being recorded. All right. So on the screen, I'll give you guys just a minute. I want you to kind of quickly look at the picture on the screen and just type what you see in the chat box, just your first responses. I don't want you to think too much about this. Just go ahead and whatever is the first thing to come to your mind as you're looking at this picture, put it in our chat box for us. Got some responses, some different things we're seeing, a pizza party, some cigarettes, some disconnection, some chaos, busyness, family together in the room. So as we are spending a little more time looking at it, sometimes we see that our responses shift a little bit. So now what I'd ask you guys to do is, again, I let you look at that real quickly, just gave you less than a minute to look at that picture. What was easier to see, the risk or the protective factors? You can just, again, respond in the chat box. So we are going to start the process today, hopefully with our HOPE training to cognitively reframe our brains so that we are more frequently and stronger in our capacity to see the strengths in circumstances and situations. And that is important because all of us lean into type 1 or type 2 thinking on a regular basis. This is a developmental trait and task that our brains do, is help us use type 1 thinking. If Dr. Bruce Perry were here, he would talk to us about type 1 thinking being the thinking that kept us safe historically, right? So for cavemen and women, that type 1 thinking was the thinking that helped us identify when there was a saber-toothed tiger that we needed to hide from. So our brains, when they think quickly, are really good at identifying things that might be worrisome, things that might be dangerous, and things that we need to protect from. And so when we think about a child welfare environment and what we are looking for, what we are conditioned to pay attention to, we know that a lot of times our brains are going to have us focus on risk. That's why when we see pictures like that, when we see family circumstances, child welfare staff especially are pretty quick at being able to pick up the things that they might be worried about. The worry in type 1 thinking is that it's also where our implicit bias lives, because our implicit biases are our rapid associations. So what we hope to do today is shift a little bit to using type 2 thinking. And type 2 thinking is that thinking where we're kind of slowing down, where we are shifting our perspective or thinking about things through a new or different lens. And this allows us to really see things in a broader, have a broader perspective on what we might be seeing. Again, our implicit biases are embedded in type 1 thinking. And when we think about child welfare and child welfare outcomes, we know that consistently child welfare creates disproportionate impact on families and disparate outcomes, particularly for our Black and Brown families, our Native American or American Indian families, and our Latinx communities and our African American communities. We see that those communities are less likely to have children returned home and more likely to have children remain in care and be removed with a lower threshold for the removal. That type 2 thinking, that slowing down, is time and time again proven to be something that can help us really mitigate that bias, which is a goal I'm sure that all of us share, is ensuring that our system isn't creating disproportionate impacts. So how does hope show up to that? And why does hope help us sort of move to that type 2 thinking? It's because when we move towards hope, we become a part of a movement that really seeks to change the way we interact with families, and interact with them in a way that sees families as whole, recognizes and really supports and builds strengths within families while avoiding the perpetuation of racist systems. So hope exists because there has been a lot of work that has exploded in strength-based approaches. Just before this, I was on a call with Dr. Sege, who is really the mastermind behind healthy outcomes through positive experiences. And he was talking about all of the different things that we may have seen before that talk about positive experiences in child's lives and why they matter and why they're important. So those of you that have been in child welfare a long time may have heard of the 40 developmental assets from the Search Institute before. You've probably heard of protective factors before. You've probably heard of essentials for childhood, all of these different things that really play into the impact of positive childhood experiences. And so hope itself is grounded in the core assumptions of the science of positive, which comes to us from Jeff Lickenbach at the Montana Institute. And the research that he has done has shown us that positive experiences we have evidence of their impact on development for young people. When our young people have positive experiences, their long-term health and well-being is improved. And when I think about the reasons why caseworkers and people get into child welfare and get into early childhood, it's often because they want to ensure that our communities are healthy for the long term. And so hope allows us to really be a part of doing that. And what we know, again, is that our systems frequently focus on the negative. I think about our screening tools. I think about our risk and safety assessment tools that we might be using to be making decisions. I think about discipline tools that are used in schools to pay attention to behaviors that they may see from students. And we know that a lot of those tools actually are detrimental to our outcomes because they codify our implicit bias, right? They train us to look for the presumption of deficit or the negative things within families. And what hope asks us to do is shift to intentionally look for the positive things that are present, both in the families that we're working with and the young people that we're working with. So before we start, this is a picture actually of my one of my kiddos' recent field trip to the Castlewood Canyons. Many of the kids in his class had not been to Castlewood Canyons before, and this hike was a challenge for them. They were tired by the end of this hike, but I want you to think about someone that you know personally or professionally that had a challenging childhood. Maybe they had some ACEs present in their life, or maybe they just had some things that you know that they struggled with. And I want you to think again of how is it that they have come out to be successful today? So someone that you know who went through hard things and is doing well now. Could be you, it could be someone that you work with, could be a family member. But I want you to share in the chat box some of the adjectives you might use to describe that person. Someone determined, positive, hardworking, empathetic, resilient, kind, nice. Some creative giving. Some good things, some ways that we all really like to be probably spoken about. All right, so another chat box response. So I've talked a little bit about it, but I want to know, what is it that you already know about positive childhood experiences? Do you know nothing about them? Am I speaking a foreign language and you're sitting there like, what does she mean? What are these positive childhood experiences? Do you know a little bit about it? Maybe you've heard someone talk about it before. Maybe you know more than a little. Are you well versed? Any experts on here? All right, so we've got a wide variety of experiences on here. So let's talk about how positive childhood experiences can actually revise our definition of health and help us create long-term positive outcomes in our communities. So I want to start just by talking about the science. Oh, great. This CSU Extension Office has heard more about ACEs than PACEs. Well, that is, that's why we're here. That's why we're talking about this, because a lot of us have heard about ACEs. So when we talk about positive childhood experiences, in 2015, Dr. Sege, along with Dr. Jennifer Jones, Dr. Peter Pecora, and Dr. Sege at the Hope National Resource Center wanted to understand more about how positive childhood experiences impact long-term health. So there was a study that was being done in Wisconsin using the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance Survey. It's the BRICFAS. It's a telephone survey that is used to collect data from people about their experiences in childhood. So some of the ACEs stuff, as well as their current mental health as adults. And they added 7 questions about positive childhood experiences to this survey. They looked at almost 7,000 surveys and this was again an audience in the state of Wisconsin, and then assessed what came of it. The seven positive childhood experiences questions that they asked covered what you see on your screen now. And lots of times people like to take a screenshot of this or get a picture of this because these 7 things are things that we can have conversations about, and we can build, and we can learn and understand about families. So the 7 things that they added to the BRICFAS was how often as children do people remember feeling like they could talk to their family about their feelings? Did they feel that their family stood by them and was there for them during difficult things? Did they participate and enjoy community traditions? That might be neighborhood, school, their city or town, but things that were a tradition in their community. Did they have a sense of belonging in high school and feel like they were supported by friends in school and in their lives? Did they have at least 2 non-parent adults who took a genuine interest in them? And did they feel safe and protected by an adult in their home? When I train this to child welfare audiences, I think it's really important that we look at this and recognize that only 2 of the positive childhood experiences that are listed on here are actually related to your family. And family really can be broadly explained, right? It doesn't have to be just a biological family, but most of these positive childhood experiences happen in our communities as well. And I think that's really powerful for us to think about, that these positive childhood experiences can be happening anywhere in our community, but it's about who's around us and who is supporting us as we are growing. So these are the 7 questions that were added onto the onto the survey. And when we looked at the survey results, what they found was astonishing. They found that these 7 positive childhood experiences actually protect future mental health consistently. So the more positive childhood experiences that respondents had, the lower the odds that they were reporting poor mental health. So when we look at what's on this screen, we're seeing that when people reported 6 or 7 of the positive childhood experiences in their life, 8 out of 10 respondents reported good mental health. Similarly, when they looked at the participants who reported 0 to 2 of these positive childhood experiences, about half, or 1 in 2 of the respondents, reported positive mental health. And as with any good scale, we see that in the middle, when we have 3 to 5 positive childhood experiences, it's right in line with that, the impact growing as the experiences grow. When we think about the impact of this, it's important to know that the original study was done in that Wisconsin survey with that limited audience, which we know is a more homogeneous group than is actually representative of our country. And there were 4 more studies that were just finalized this summer that looked at a much broader audience, that were much more inclusive in their samples, that also showed these same results, which is pretty powerful to think that when we have these positive childhood experiences, the more of them that are present, the less likely we are to see someone struggling with their mental health. And good mental health for this study was those not reporting depression or simply saying that they had struggled with poor mental health. So the correlation there is that when people experience positive childhood experiences, that builds on their resiliency and impacts their long-term health outcomes. And Dr. Sege does a beautiful job. I am not a doctor, so I do not have the brain slides on here because I do not have a PhD or full understanding of everything about how the brain works. But what Dr. Sege talks really beautifully about is what they think is the cause of the resiliency building based on the positive childhood experiences is the presence of those stable, nurturing relationships provides a buffer to the impact of those negative experiences that may happen in their life. So there's this resiliency actually in the way the brain develops because those relationships are around to buffer that toxic stress, which we know leads to that increased cortisol and some of those things that we see when we're talking about ACEs. So that resiliency building occurs from having those relationships and those experiences, and it leads to those long-term health outcomes. So next question, which I got a little bit of an idea from the previous chat question. When you think about what you know about ACEs, how comfortable do you feel with your ACEs knowledge? So a little more comfortable talking and thinking about ACEs and that makes sense because as a prevention community, there has been a lot of information that has been shared. There's been a lot of discussion about ACEs. The ACEs study was conducted in 1998. Again, there were similar concerns about the audience size of the original survey, but it has been, sorry, I'm lost a word in my head. It's been done over and over again to similar results in our communities. It was originally conducted in 1998, looked at questions about people's childhood and looked at their current mental and physical health. And as many of you are aware, what we saw is that these ACEs sort of came out in different categories. So experiences of abuse, both emotional, physical, or sexual, different neglect experiences, as well as household challenges, were closely tied to long-term health outcomes. Yes, replicated. Thank you, Jan, for picking the word out of my brain. So when we think about early adversity, we see that when children experience adverse childhood experiences, there are long-term outcomes, including outcomes around impacts of injury, mental health impacts, maternal health impacts, our infectious disease. There's an increased likelihood that we're going to be exposed to infectious disease. Chronic disease can be tied to the presence of ACEs, risky behaviors, and we see more limited opportunities in terms of education, occupation, and income related to the number of adverse childhood experiences that are present in a child's life. And so in 2017, there was a good deal of work done looking at these ACEs and really trying to pick out, like, are ACEs really the problem, or is there something greater and deeper that's contributing to the presence of ACEs that are those things that we can kind of shift in our environments? And so in 2017, Dr. Dietz and Dr. Ellis from George Washington University created and shared their Pair of ACEs tree. And that took us from just having this idea that if you had these adverse experiences in your life, that you were kind of tied to these long-term outcomes, and really had us sort of shift our perspective and our view to understand how community environments consistently contribute to the presence of ACEs in a child's life. So you look at a parent's experience, what they're maybe navigating as they're parenting, and many times these things are that we see at the bottom, the adverse community environments, create the presence of ACEs then in a child's life. And this both brings hope to us, right? Because it's not just your parent did this to you and they chose to pass some ACEs on to you, but it gives us some ideas of where we can be addressing things and changing things in our community environment. So looking at how can we disrupt the presence of poverty in a family's life? How can we impact systemic racism, redlining, community disruption, all of those things that are going to impact and contribute to the presence of ACEs in a child's life. How many of you have seen the Pair of ACEs tree before and had some conversations about it? A few of you? Kendra and I were lucky enough a couple of weeks ago to get to actually present with Dr. Ellis at Illuminate Strengthening Families Conference. So it was pretty powerful to get to hear her talk about how our work and Kendra's work in our trainings and all of that is actually contributing to the disruption of these adverse community environments. So what does HOPE do with those? HOPE actually, in response to those ACEs, the pair of ACEs, right? Both the community environments and the adverse childhood experience, wants to give us a roadmap. Like, what is it that we can do to be disrupting those ACEs from happening in someone's life? And so HOPE gives us these 4 building blocks that you see on your screen. And these building blocks describe the key types and sources of positive childhood experiences that are critical for that optimal development.
Caller.
Oh. Maureen, are you able? Thank you. So we know that, again, the ACEs can disrupt positive childhood experiences. For example, if a child experiences abuse, then we're going to see that that disrupts the first two building blocks, the relationship between the parent or the caregiver and the child. That relationship, when there's abuse, is going to be impacted, but we're also going to see that the safe environment that that child is in has been disrupted, because now that environment is not as safe for the child. When we think about family disruption, so we think about if there is criminalization or incarceration of parents, or work hours that take me away from my children for the entire day, then we see that not having that home relationship, not having someone there to support my emotional growth and my engagement, could contribute to, again, an unsafe environment for me or stunted emotional growth. Again, not things that parents are choosing, but things that our community structures might be contributing to that lead to those longer term outcomes for our young people. So these four building blocks, again, relationships, safe environments, engagement. So when we think about engagement, that is feeling like I belong in my community and that I have a role in my community. So there's something I bring to my community, right? There's something that I contribute that is special to me being present in my community. And then emotional growth, getting to work through and navigate hard things and understand my emotions and be comfortable in my emotions. This is a lot of the social emotional learning components that we're hearing and seeing about in our schools right now. So how did these positive childhood experiences, what did we see happen when there were ACEs present and the positive childhood experiences present? We actually continued to see that when someone had 4 or more ACEs, that the number of positive childhood experiences that they were able to report continued to show an impact on their likelihood of having positive mental health for their in the long run. So what you see here is the sample of participants in the survey that all had 4 or more ACEs, which we know, if we're thinking about ACEs, that there's some significant long-term health impacts possible from having 4 ACEs present in your life. But when you had 4 ACEs and you were able to identify 0 to 2 of the positive childhood experiences in your life, over 60% of those respondents reported navigating depression and poor mental health. When they reported 3 to 5 positive childhood experiences, that number dropped to about 42% of participants reporting struggling with their mental health. But when we had 6 to 7 of those positive childhood experiences present in their lives, we saw that only about 20% of the respondents reported struggling with their mental health. And I just want you to sit with that just for a minute. That what we're seeing here in this data is that the absence of positive childhood experiences can actually be more damaging than even the presence of ACEs. And that's a shift, right? A lot of times we think about that when ACEs are present, that there is a worry for long-term outcomes. But what this data continues to show us is that the absence of positive experiences has a more negative impact on long-term well-being. What reactions do you have to that? What's coming up for you? You can respond verbally or in the chat. It's up to you. Nothing?
Well, I was just thinking a repetition of not having any positive childhood experiences leads into like desolation as an adult, isolation, sadness, a literal loss of hope. And so I get it, but I didn't get it until you put up this slide. And I was like, that's legit. And that's so sad because there are so many children and us as adults that didn't have those positive childhood experiences. And I guess when you flip it like this reframing it was really good. Thank you.
Yeah, well, and the push I want to make is how much power do we have then to be creating positive childhood experiences? I think that's the piece when I think about my work in child welfare, right? And the families that I worked with and the young people that I worked with, if I had known that there was things that I could be doing that was more impactful than just trying to, catch up from these ACEs, right? That we can actually create these positive experiences. We can have conversations with parents about what are the community traditions and why do those community traditions matter? And Kendra, we're probably not going to get to them today, but Kendra, next time we're together, we'll talk about how those positive experiences showed up for her throughout her child welfare involvement, and how her teachers, her foster parents, her caseworker, her GAL, her CASA, all of those people in her life were really powerful in creating positive childhood experiences for her. And that's this piece that makes me so excited about it, is I can talk to a parent and say, hey, who are the 2 adults outside of your home that your kid feels really safe and comfortable talking to? And how can we create those opportunities for those relationships? And how can we get your kid connected with their peers more, right? Those are things we can build with those building blocks that we think of in those positive experiences. Again, only 2 of those positive childhood experiences happen only within the home, right? The rest of them are, what do our communities look like around us? And how do those communities around us build that resilience and really allow us to have those better long-term outcomes? So I want to give you guys just a little bit on these 4 building blocks. And then when we come back next time, we'll go really deep into them, and Kendra will talk about kind of how they showed up for through her life experience. But starting with the first one, we're looking at relationships. And so how are we really being thoughtful about supporting the young people that we work with in creating relationships with other adults and other children, right? So how are we creating those relationships and that access to activities where they can build those meaningful relationships? And so I'm in my head, what I go to for my kids is the teams that they have been on, right? Those relationships on those teams or in their schools are really important. We moved when one of my kids was in 3rd grade, and that disruption of some of those relationships was really hard for her to navigate when COVID then came right after, and those relationships had been fractured by the move. So we're really intentional in our home about how are we building relationship opportunities for that kiddo, and purposefully set up more sleepovers and more play dates even at age 13 than we did ever for my older child, because we know she navigated that disruption in some of her relationships. Then we look at environments. So how are we creating in our communities safe, equitable, and stable environments? And this includes environments that kids live in, that they play in. So is there access to play space? Is there access to green space in our communities? What does learning look like both in our homes and in our schools? How are those environments safe for kids? So are we addressing when there are issues that are making those learning or playing environments unsafe for kids. And what does that look like? I think about in the city of Aurora, where I'm at, one of the things that we have navigated is there's been an increase in youth gun violence. And so we brought together a group of youth who then talked about what they needed to not be involved in some of this gun violence was spaces where they could just be kids. So we started hosting safe zone events, which were just events where young people could come and just be kids and know that there were going to be activities. And these are teenagers and adolescents who might have been at risk of going to house parties where there might have been some of this gun violence happening. But instead, we created community spaces where it was safe for them to play and just be kids. And the funniest part about it is that there was a lot of worry about us bringing these kids together. And what we saw happening the most was kids sitting on office chairs and spinning around in circles, because at their root, these kids that maybe some people in the community were worried about being violent are really just kids, right? Kids who wanted to sit on office chairs and spin around in circles because it's fun. So how are we creating those safe spaces for kids? The third building block is engagement. So how are kids getting the opportunity to engage in social and civic engagement? What voice do they have in their community, their home, their schools? So do they have chores at home that are things that they do to contribute? Do they play a role at school in decisions around activities that the schools offer? Really thinking about what are those opportunities for them to participate in those cultural traditions, those community traditions, those religious traditions that exist in their community, so that they see their worth and value in their community. And then the fourth building block is emotional growth through playing and interacting with peers, while also developing self-awareness and self-regulation. So how am I learning to navigate hard things and conflict with my peers? And we saw a huge learning loss in this particular building block when we think about COVID and how many of our kids were isolated for a long time. So how are we building those spaces for our young people? Like I said, when we're back together next time, Kendra is going to share with all of you how those 4 building blocks really showed up in her experience navigating through her childhood and through some of what she had to navigate in her childhood. But what I would ask you guys to do between now and the next time we're together is go to this website that's listed on here, and I'll try and pop it in the chat for you as well. Go to this website and check out some of the resources that are on there, because whatever it is that your role might be in your community, there are resources that we share with workers on how to ask questions about the 4 building blocks in their life. Thank you, Maureen, for popping that in there. There are handouts that are posters that you can use to help families learn and understand. There are resources for teachers. There are resources for creating hope in everyday moments and everyday interactions with the people you work with. There are so many resources on here, and what I'd like you guys to do is find one resource and just figure out how might you use that. And that's what I'd like for us to come back to when we are back together next time. And you guys are able to hear from Kendra. I just want you guys kind of getting a little more comfortable with what those 4 building blocks are and identifying what your ideas are for how in your role you can be building those building blocks for the young people you work with. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Maureen. Well, I'll take there's a couple minutes if people have questions at all before we end.
Comments or questions?
I have a question. So and you said you're going to get into these more, so I don't want to get down in the weeds too terribly much. So you were talking about like engagement. So, like for kids having a leading role in their homes, like I think that they have responsibilities, like my kids have chores, but like how does that, how how is that engagement?
Yeah, so seeing themselves as a part of something bigger. So when we think about that, one of the positive experiences was that they are engaged in community traditions. So being engaged and knowing that you matter in your community, and it might be in the home. Chores is a good example for our younger kids, but I think about our older kids and some of their role in creating systems change and being active around social justice in our communities. When we look at a healing centered framework, so moving beyond just trauma informed, but moving to healing centered, one of the things that is incredibly healing is taking action on things that have impacted you. So
Okay.
being a voice to speak up against, you know, any of those ACEs or those adverse community environments, fighting back against those things, changing how you experience that for the better for other people, gives us a sense of belonging and a sense of agency,
So
to
this could
really
look more
build.
like on like a more on a higher level, like doing the cancer walks and
Mhm.
the save the doggy walks and the, you know, all those kinds of things on like a broader level.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Missy,
Anything
there's
that
a
gets you
question.
engaged in your community and gives you a sense of purpose. I'm reading Desiree's comment into the chat box about the concept of it takes a village. And I would say, Desiree, you are right on. Illuminate has actually done some studies in the state of Colorado looking at parent willingness to ask for help. And not only their willingness to ask for help, but also do families identify having people that they could ask for help. And what we see is that only I think it's 1 in 4 families identified having someone who they could ask for help. But then of those 1 in 5, only 1 in 4 were willing to ask somebody for help when they were struggling in parenting. So when I think about how we use hope to have conversations with families, one of those pieces is saying to parents, it's important that your kids have other people to talk to. How can we make sure that they have someone else that they can talk to outside of you? And how can we make sure that you have other relationships that you can talk to as well? It goes back to our protective factor of social connectedness, that we all do better when we have people we're connected to. And that's a huge piece that we do try and push with hope and with our protective factors, is that social connection piece.
Well, and that's kind of a good segue because as I alluded to or said in the opening that the trainings are sponsored by COPE, which is a grant to try to expand peer support in Colorado. I'm gonna put the link to the project page on our website. You can get more information on Illuminate's website too, and I'll pop that in there as well. But this particular project site has a link to all of some flyers for people to refer parents and parties that they're interacting with for Circle of Parents. I'm happy to talk to anyone else about that. Carrie's one of our facilitators of Circle of Parents in Montezuma County. So sorry, I didn't mean to
I would just add that our Circle of Parents have also been trained in hope. We did it at the conference for them. And then we're also doing some other things with them on, we're doing a book club on the What Happened to You book, just to really push this. How do we really get into this hope stuff and really shift looking at just the trauma to looking at what are the positive things we can be doing with each other? So Carrie can speak to how moving that experience has been already too. It's been pretty powerful stuff to know that our Circle parents are leading this work.
Any other questions or comments for Missy? really great engagement, and I appreciate everyone's participation. I know it's the lunch hour, and we've got dockets and all kinds of stuff going on. So again, I know we keep telling you this, but part 2 is November 16th, 12 to 1. We put in Claudia's email address. So if you got this invite from someone else and you haven't gotten the invite for the 16th, just reach out. We're happy to add you or add you to the newsletter. And we hope to see you on the 16th. And thank you to Missy for part 1, and I'm excited for part 2.
Thank you guys. And thank you to Kendra for being here. Next time, I promise Kendra is going to be leading the whole thing.
We're excited to see you, Kendra. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
And Maureen, I put my email in there. I'm happy if you want to share that with people. If you share the website with them too, that it's fine if people reach out to me with any questions that they might have. Oh, you're
Okay,
muted.
great. I can take care of that because I'm going to send the survey by email, and I can put your email address as well and a reminder about the next one.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much.
Yeah. Have a great rest of your day.
You too.
Bye bye.